My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm a retired elementary school teacher, and I live on a quiet street near the historic district of Savannah, Georgia. For years, I kept a tidy house, tended my garden, and cared for number 7 Venetian Lane, while my heart stayed with my family, my husband, Howard, our son, Daniel, and his wife, Sophie. If you're just joining this story, take a deep breath, because what I'm about to share is something I never imagined could happen under my own jasmine-covered porch, on these polished wooden steps, while I still believed everything in this house was proper and safe. What I discovered changed my life completely. It may change how you look at what feels familiar, especially if you're someone who believes Southern manners always mean safety. We think we know the people closest to us, but some things only surface when we least expect them, when the hallway light clicks on at midnight and the wall clock shifts one quiet notch. If you feel a tug in your chest while you listen, please tap like. It brings a little sunlight to this mother's heart. Subscribe to Grandma Life Stories so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing which corner of the country or the world is listening and what moment of your day this is. It started when I noticed Sophie changing. She used to be gentle, quick to smile, the kind of girl who'd peek into my kitchen to ask if I needed a hand, share a few stories from her farm class, and laugh when Daniel fought with the corkscrew. My daughter-in-law was the warm light in this house. At least, that's how I remember her. After a week of Daniel staying late on a work project, I felt something was off. When I knocked on their door, Sophie barely stepped onto the porch to greet me. When I went in, she hugged me, but it was distant, with an expression I'd never seen before. I thought maybe she was tired. Maybe it was school. "Are you all right, honey?" I asked, resting my hand on her shoulder like I always do. "Yes, Mom," she whispered, eyes sliding away from mine. Howard appeared in the doorway. "She's been quiet a few days. It's a phase. She's busy. She's growing. Come on, dinner's ready." That night, I watched Sophie at the table. She ate slowly, head slightly bowed. Every so often, she glanced toward Howard as if she were afraid to say the wrong thing. And the strangest part, there were shadows under her eyes, like she hadn't slept well for a while. "How's farm class going?" I asked. "Okay," she said without looking up. "Any better with your group partner? The friend who likes to stop by our porch? Does she still come?" That was when I saw Howard look straight at Sophie. She swallowed hard before she could answer. After dinner, I went to their room to wish her good night. With just the two of us, I sat on the edge of the bed and asked again if everything was okay. That was when Sophie took my hand and said a sentence that chilled me. "Mom, please don't tell him I talked to you." "What are we talking about, sweetheart?" I asked, my heart thudding. Before she could answer, Howard filled the doorway. "Time to turn in. Big morning." The way Sophie startled at the sight of him, that wasn't normal. I squeezed her hand and stepped out, my mind spinning with 1,000 questions. I couldn't sleep that night. Something was very wrong. I could feel it. I decided I would watch closely for a few days before I did anything. In the days that followed, I noticed everything. Sophie wasn't the bright girl I knew. At home, she spent most of her time in the room, writing notes, rearranging small vials of compounds, avoiding the porch whenever the hallway light flipped on. Whenever I asked if she was okay, she said yes, but her eyes told a different story. One afternoon when Howard went out for a drive in the 1989 Pontiac, I sat with Sophie in the living room and tried to talk. At first she resisted. Then she opened up a little. "You can tell me anything," I said. "You're safe here." She was quiet, fingers knotted together. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, she said, "I don't like the nights when you turn the lights off early." "Why, honey? Is there anyone that makes you feel uneasy in this house?" "No." She didn't explain. She only lowered her head. I tried again. "What happens after I go upstairs?" Tears welled in her eyes. I pulled her close and felt her body tremble. Between quick breaths, she whispered, "Mom, please don't tell him I cried." That sentence broke my heart. What kind of fear was this? Why would Sophie guard herself against someone in this home? "Sophie, does anyone make you feel threatened? You can tell me." Right then, we heard a key turn in the front door. Sophie slipped from my arms, wiped her eyes, and changed her face as if she'd put on a mask. "I'm back," Howard called, the night air on his coat. He saw us in the living room and smiled, but in that smile, I felt something uneasy. "What are you two talking about?" "Just little things," I said, keeping my voice even. "Right, honey?" Sophie nodded and asked to go to her room. When she returned, her eyes were still damp, but she tried to hide it. At dinner, I watched every beat between her and Howard, the way she avoided his gaze, weighed each word, and held her small shoulders like they carried a weight no one else could see. Nia, by contrast, acted perfectly normal, asked about school, commented on the weather, like any other mom. Later, when we were getting ready for bed, I asked her about Ethan's behavior. "You don't see a change? Quieter? More withdrawn?" She shrugged while rubbing in her night cream. "It's a phase, Darius. Kids go through this. One day they're bubbly. The next they're inward. It's normal. But those dark circles. He looks like he isn't sleeping. He has nightmares," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Kids do. And why didn't you tell me?" "Because you're on the road. I didn't want you worrying behind the wheel. You already have enough to think about, right?" It sounded reasonable, but something in me stayed uneasy. That night, I woke up more than once, thinking about my son, the change in him, the fear in his eyes. During one of those wake-ups, I realized Nia wasn't in bed. I got up and stepped into the hall. The house was quiet. The small light in the hallway was on. That's when I saw it. Ethan's bedroom door was ajar. Nia was inside. I froze in the hallway, careful not to make a sound, trying to make sense of it. About 30 minutes later, she slipped out and gently pulled the door closed. "What were you doing in his room at this hour?" I asked. She jumped. "Darius, you scared me," she said, a hand to her chest. "I was checking on him, because of the nightmares." 30 minutes to check on his sleep? He woke up. He was agitated. I stayed to calm him. "Why? What kind of question is that?" "Sorry," I said, masking my doubt. "I'm just worried." We went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep again. The next morning, after Nia drove Ethan to school, I went straight to his room. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I just knew I needed a clue, something to explain what was happening. That's when I saw the old teddy bear I'd given him years ago, lying under the bed. Ethan loved that bear. Now it was torn in places. Stuffing poked out. It didn't make sense. My kid always took careful care of his things. When I picked it up, I noticed something that unsettled me even more. Dark stains on the fabric, like dried tears. The next night, I stayed awake on purpose. Again around 11, Nia slipped out of bed and went to Ethan's room. This time, I waited a few minutes, then crept toward the door and tried to listen. I heard a muffled sound. My son was crying, soft, held-back sobs, like he was afraid to make noise. "Discipline," I heard Nia say, low and firm. "It's for your own good." What was happening behind that door? What kind of discipline makes a child cry at midnight? Right then, I made a decision that would change our lives. The next morning, using work as an excuse, I left early. My mind was racing with questions and doubts. Was I overreacting? Was it really just a phase, like Nia said? But those stifled cries, the fear in my boy's eyes, I couldn't shake them. I drove into town and walked into an electronics store. A young clerk helped me. I explained I needed a small, discreet camera, easy to install, viewable from my phone. "Home security, sir?" he asked. "Yes," I said, a lump forming in my throat, "to keep my son safe." I left with a tiny camera that could be hidden easily. He'd shown me how to set it up and how to access it through the app. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who'd install a hidden camera in his own home, to watch his own wife. But my son's safety mattered more than anything. When I got back, Nia was in the kitchen making lunch. Ethan was at school. It was the perfect time. "Did you get what you needed?" she asked, stirring a pot. "Yeah, got it all done," I lied, slipping the bag with the camera into my coat pocket. "I'm going to shower." I went to Ethan's room and looked for the right spot. I needed a view of the whole room, but nothing obvious. I settled on the bookshelf, tucked between a few toys, small enough to miss, positioned well enough to see. With shaky hands, I installed it and checked the feed on my phone. It worked perfectly. Relief and guilt mixed in my chest. Relief that I might finally learn the truth. Guilt that I was invading privacy in my own home. But something in me said this was right. That night at dinner, I tried to act normal, but my stomach churned. Ethan stayed quiet, only answered when asked directly. Kept glancing at his mom with worried eyes. Nia seemed completely normal. Talked about neighbors, groceries, weekend plans. "I have to head back out the day after tomorrow," I said, watching them both. "Long haul down to Texas." Ethan's shoulders dipped. A flicker crossed Nia's eyes, so faint I almost missed it. "How long this time?" she asked, calm in a way that now felt suspicious. "At least 2 weeks, maybe more." Sophie lowered her head, tapping the fork against a piece of chicken. Howard smiled lightly. "We're all going to miss Mom, right, Sophie?" She nodded without a word. After dinner, I went to her room to settle her for the night. When it was just the two of us, she gripped my hand. "Mom, could you stay close to me tonight?" The desperation in her voice tightened my chest. "Of course, honey. I'll be right out in the hall. You're safe, okay?" She didn't answer. She only held me tighter, as if letting go meant a fall. In that moment, I knew I'd been right to hide the camera inside the wall clock. The next day, I spent every minute I could with Sophie. I took her to the River Street Market. We sipped jasmine tea on the porch. We went over a few old apothecary formulas in her notebook. I wanted her to feel me nearby, to know she could trust me. That night, before she drifted off, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried one more time. "Sophie, you know you can tell me anything, even if someone told you not to." She flicked a quick glance toward the door, as if to be sure we were truly alone. "I know, Mom," she whispered. "Is there something you want to tell me? Something that makes you sad? Or afraid?" Her eyes brimmed. She held it back. I can't, Mom." "Why not, sweetheart? Why—" Her mouth opened, then stopped. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Howard, coming closer. "Bedtime for you two," he said from the doorway. "Big day tomorrow." I hugged Sophie once more and whispered against her ear, "I'm here. I'll protect you." When I stepped out, Howard walked with me toward the primary bedroom. We lay down. A few minutes later, I pretended to sleep. About an hour after that, once he thought I was out, he slipped from the bed and left the room. I reached for my phone and opened the app tied to the wall clock. My heart hammered so hard it might break free of my chest. On the screen, I watched Howard enter Sophie's room. He eased the door closed behind him. Sophie lay still, clearly awake, like she'd been waiting for the sound of that latch every night. I saw her curl under the blanket, pulling it to her chin. "Please don't. I did exactly what you asked," she whispered. "You know that doesn't matter," he said, low, cold. "This is instruction." The hallway light flicked once. His shadow draped the edge of the bed. On the small screen, his hand slid past the clock face, blocking part of the lens. A faint click. Sophie's pearl necklace broke. A few beads rolled across the wood floor. A wine glass on the bedside table tipped, red, bleeding into a thin stain. Sophie drew in tighter, eyes wide with fear. "Please, don't." "Shh." He held a finger to his lips and tilted his head toward the wall. "The neighbors don't need to hear, and Daniel doesn't need to know." The image trembled. The clock kept time, its second hand crossing each notch like a count. "This is better," he murmured. "Order will be kept." I clenched the phone until my hand went numb. On the screen, only warm yellow light, moving shadows, and the scatter sound of pearls rolling long across the floor. "This is for your own good," he went on, his voice so cold I barely recognized the man I married. "One day you'll thank me for the discipline." What happened next was one of the hardest things I've ever had to witness in my life. Howard's shadow covered the edge of the bed. The hallway light flicked once, then held. These were not clumsy gestures or ordinary scolding. They were cold, deliberate acts, one after another, while he whispered instruction like an order. Sophie didn't dare cry out. I could only see her shoulders tremble with each stifled sob. I watched her fingers clutch the sheet, tears soaking the pillow. Worst of all was her eyes, a mix of pain and resignation, like this was a routine she'd been forced to learn. I wanted to rush in, to end it, but part of me knew I needed proof, something concrete. I had to record the truth to make sure Sophie would never face this again. So, with a breaking heart, I kept the wall clock camera rolling. "This is because you talked too much to Mom Margaret today," I heard Howard say, low. "You know better than to share family matters." At last, after a stretch that felt endless, he stopped. Sophie curled on the bed, her small body shaking in silent sobs. "Remember the silence agreement," he leaned in. "If you tell Daniel or anyone, things will be much worse." His hand brushed her neck. The pearl strand broke. A few beads skittered across the wood floor with soft clicks. "Wash your face and sleep, and I don't want to hear another sound." Sophie nodded, terrified. Howard straightened the blanket as if nothing had happened, as if neatness could erase the dark that had just passed through that room. "Good night," he said, and pulled the door to, very gently. Back in my darkened room, with the phone still in my hand and those images burning into memory, I cried in silence. How did I not see this sooner? How did I leave that girl so vulnerable in my own home? Those quiet nights, the hallway light blinking, how long had this been going on? A few minutes later, Howard came back to our bed. I pretended to sleep, though every muscle in me wanted to confront him, to ask how a man once respected could do this to his own daughter-in-law. But I knew I needed a strategy. Sophie was in danger, and I had to move carefully if I was going to protect her the right way. I stayed awake all night, checking the camera now and then. I saw Sophie, after the door closed, sit up and hug a pillow, gather the scattered pearls with shaking hands. I watched her finally fall asleep from sheer exhaustion, and I promised myself I would do whatever it took to get her out. By morning, I was up early, making hot tea and toast. When Sophie walked into the kitchen, dark circles under her eyes, far away, my heart clenched. I tried to act normal, though the images from the night pressed in. "Did you sleep any better?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. Yes, ma'am," she whispered, eyes lowered. "Sophie," I said, bending to meet her gaze. "Look at me." She raised her eyes slowly. Inside them, fear, pain, held tight. "I'm here," I said, taking her hand, "and I will do everything to protect you. Do you trust me?" A flicker of hope, then it faded at the sound of footsteps. "Morning." Howard walked in like nothing had happened. He poured coffee, adjusted a cuff. "What time are you heading to the Garden District today?" "After lunch," I said evenly. "I want to use the good light." "Good," he smiled, setting down the cup. "Don't worry about a thing. Everything at home is fine. Isn't that right, Sophie?" My daughter-in-law only nodded. She didn't speak. After breakfast, when Howard drove Daniel to work, I hurried to copy the video from the night before. I had to keep the evidence safe. I moved the files to a USB drive and uploaded them to the cloud. I could not risk losing something this terrible and this vital. That afternoon, I left the house under the pretense of visiting the Garden District. Every mile away from Venetian Lane felt like a wrench, knowing Sophie was still with the man who hurt her. But I had a plan, and the wall clock camera would keep watching quietly so I could act with the full strength of the law. That night, I parked by the river lot and opened the camera app, my heart heavy as lead. Just as I feared, the pattern repeated. The hallway light clicked on, the door pulled to, the ritual began again. "Lower your voice," I heard Howard say, low. No one in this house needs to know. That was when I made a decision that would change our lives for good. I couldn't wait to get back. Sophie would not endure one more night in that house. With shaking hands and stinging eyes, I called Lillian Pierce, my sister, a former court clerk. "Margaret, what is it? You rarely call this late," she said, already worried. "Lillian, I need you now. It's an emergency. It's about Sophie." "Good Lord, what's wrong? Is she sick?" "No, worse. Come get her right now. Any excuse. Tell her you need help prepping the parish fundraiser books for Sunday night. Anything. Just get her away from Howard, please." "Margaret, you're scaring me. What is happening?" "I can't explain everything yet. I'm down by the river, a few minutes from the house. Can you help me?" A short silence. Then her voice turned firm. "Yes, I'm leaving now." "Thank you," I exhaled. "When Sophie is safe with you, call me. And please, don't tell Howard." I hung up, stared at the screen, and prayed Lillian would get Sophie out quickly. I started the car and headed homeward. I didn't care about errands or appointments. I was only thinking about protecting my daughter-in-law. A little over an hour later, my phone buzzed. Lillian. "Margaret, we're at my house. I told them I needed Sophie to help reconcile the parish donor list. Howard looked suspicious, but he let her go. We're sitting in the kitchen." I closed my eyes and thanked God. "How is she?" "Quiet, wound tight. She keeps asking for you." "Can I speak to her?" "Of course. Hold on." A clatter. Then Sophie's voice, small as wind. "Mom, Margaret?" "Sweetheart," I said, my throat tight. "Are you okay with Aunt Lillian?" Yes," she whispered. "Are you coming?" "Yes, I'm on my way. Stay with your aunt. You're safe. I promise." "Okay." I heard the soft lift of her breath. "Thank you, Mom." Lillian came back on. "Margaret, you need to tell me what's going on. She's afraid to go back. What did Howard do?" "It's hard to say out loud. Howard has been abusing her. I have video." The line went dead quiet. No, not Howard. I didn't want to believe it either, but I saw it with my own eyes. I put a camera in the wall clock after the signs. He waits until the house is still, goes in late, uses discipline to shut her up. Not scolding, violence. "Dear Lord," Lillian breathed, "I've got the files. When I get there, I'll show you. Right now, I only need to know she's safe." She is. Howard called twice asking about the fundraiser schedule. "What did you say?" "That we needed to reconcile donors and print receipts. I told him I'd bring her back later. I don't know if he bought it, but it's enough for now." "Thank you, Lillian. I'll come straight to your house at first light. I won't go to Venetian Lane. I'll be waiting." I drove through the night. Every minute I thought of Sophie, of the scars the months, perhaps years, had carved into her. How could a man once respected do that to his own daughter-in-law? And how did I not see sooner? The tires hummed. I replayed the signs I'd ignored. The midnight hallway light, the snapped pearls, the dark circles, the averted eyes, the excuses about discipline. The times Sophie tried to speak, then fell silent at footsteps in the hall. The times she begged me not to be gone too long. Around 6 a.m., I pulled into a gas station, filled the tank, and washed my face. I was exhausted, body and soul, but the path ahead was clear. While the attendant finished pumping gas, I pulled out my phone to check again. The camera app opened. Sophie's room was empty. The sheets were smoothed flat. Then I heard Howard's voice through the tiny speaker. "I don't know," he said, pacing with his phone in hand. "Lillian picked Sophie up last night and still hasn't brought her back. Daniel isn't answering. I'm worried. And Margaret just texted she's getting home earlier than planned." And he paused to listen to the other end. "I don't know if Margaret suspects anything. She's been watching too closely these last few days, asking too many questions about Sophie." Another silence. "Of course I didn't say anything to her. The girl knows not to talk. She's too scared to tell anyone." I felt my blood heat. He talked about Sophie's fear like it was a family secret, a habit to be kept. I closed the app and got behind the wheel. I had to get home now. By the time I reached Savannah, the clock had slipped past 9. I drove straight to Lillian's place in the Garden District, Just like we'd planned, Lillian opened the door, her face set. "She's still asleep," she said softly. "Didn't nod off until near 5. She's afraid to close her eyes." "May I sit with her?" We walked down the hall to the living room. Sophie was curled under a light blanket, peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I sat on the edge of a chair and smoothed her tangled hair. She stirred, but didn't wake. "Margaret," Lillian called from the kitchen. "We need to talk. Now." I left the door cracked in case Sophie woke, then stepped out. In the dining room, Lillian and Chloe were waiting, worry in their eyes. "I helped her bathe last night," Chloe said, eyes raw. "There are bruises on her back, old and new, like it's been happening a lot." "I know," I said, my throat tightening. "I saw." "You said you have video?" Lillian asked. I handed over my phone and opened the clips from the last 2 nights. Chloe stepped onto the porch, crying. Lillian watched to the end without a sound. Her face went pale, her hands laced tight. "Dear God, Margaret," she whispered at last. "I don't want to believe this about Howard, but the video doesn't lie." "I didn't want to believe it either," I said, pocketing the phone. "But we have to act now. Howard's suspicious. He keeps calling Daniel. I need to get Sophie somewhere safer, and to the Chatham County Police Department." A small voice from the doorway turned me around. "Mom? Margaret?" Sophie stood there, rubbing her eyes. When she saw me, she ran into my arms and broke down. I held her and made a silent vow that no one would ever touch her again. "It's all right, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm here. No one will hurt you now." She gripped my shoulders like her life depended on it. Maybe it did. We sat, her cheek against my chest, her hands clutching my blouse like she was afraid I'd disappear. Lillian and Chloe moved back to the kitchen to make coffee. I just held the girl and felt the tremor in her body slow. "Sophie," I said when her breathing eased, "I need to tell you something important." She looked up, too much fear for someone so young. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," I said, taking her hands. "I know what happens when I'm not home. I know what Howard has been doing to you at night." Her body stiffened. Panic flashed in her eyes. If he finds out I talked..." "You haven't said a word," I soothed. "I know because I put a camera in the wall clock in your room. I saw." She stared at me, confused. You saw?" "I saw," I nodded. "I saw him flip the hallway light, come in, and what he did. All of it." She dropped her gaze, as if ashamed. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words broke my heart. A victim apologizing for being harmed. I lifted her chin until her eyes met mine. "Listen to me, Sophie. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. Grown men are not allowed, ever, to hurt you like that. Do you understand?" She nodded, very slowly. Doubt still there. Months of fear don't vanish in a few sentences. "How long has this been going on?" She bit her lip, hesitating. "Since he started working late more often. He said it was to make me behave while you were gone. He said if I told, no one would believe me. He'd say I made it up for attention." I closed my eyes for a beat. The pain felt physical. All fall, maybe longer, this had been happening while I didn't see. "And when I'm home, does he still do it?" Sophie shook her head. "Less when Daniel's home. Howard waits until he's asleep, then comes in fast, so he won't wake up and hear." I remembered the nights I stirred and felt him slip back into bed, saying he'd gotten a drink or checked the doors. The mornings when Sophie looked hollow, dark crescents under her eyes, energy gone. How could I have been so blind? "When he hurts you, does he say why?" I asked. She lifted a shoulder. "Sometimes he says it's because I talked to you too much, or left something out of place, or didn't finish dinner. Most of the time he says he doesn't need a reason, so I'll learn to be strong." A hot tear slid down my cheek. I wiped it away. I had to be steady for this girl. "Sophie, look at me." I waited until her eyes met mine. As of today, this ends. You will never go through this again, I promise. And no matter how angry Howard gets, you will never be alone with him again." Right then, Lillian came into the living room with a tray, chamomile tea, and a plate of cookies. Chloe followed, eyes still pink. "Have some tea, sweetie," Lillian said gently. Sophie glanced at the tray, then up at me as if asking permission. "Go on," I nodded. "You must be hungry." She slipped from my arms and sat at the table. Chloe poured into a speckled mug and slid the cookies closer. While Sophie ate, Lillian motioned me out to the back porch. "Margaret, what are you going to do now?" "I'm going to the Chatham County Police Department," I said firm. "Turn in the footage, file a report, and request a protective order for Sophie. I'll do whatever paperwork it takes to keep her safe." Lillian nodded slowly. "You know this could tear the family apart. Howard might be arrested?" "I know," I said, meeting her eyes. "But what he's done for months has already torn us apart. A man who harms his daughter-in-law in this house faces the law. If the court orders custody or jail, let justice do its work." She swallowed. "You're right. It's hard. But Sophie comes first. She's just a young woman." "Exactly. I failed by not seeing sooner. I won't fail again." "What can I do?" "You already have. Gave her shelter. Covered until I got here. I just need you and Chloe to stay with her while I'm at the station. I don't want her interviewed yet." "Of course. She can stay here as long as she needs," Lillian said. When we came back in, Sophie was calmer, speaking softly with Chloe as she reached for another cookie. For the first time in a long while, she almost looked her age. "Sweetheart," I said, kneeling to her eye level, "I have to step out for a few hours to take care of something important. Will you stay with Aunt Lillian and Miss Chloe?" Panic flashed in her eyes. "You'll come back, right? Promise?" "Of course, I'll be back. I'm going to make sure you're safe." "Will Howard come here for me?" "No," I said flat. "He will not come here. I'll see to it. Clear?" She nodded, still unsure. Chloe understood the fear. "How about we put on your favorite superhero movie while Mom Margaret is out?" Sophie gave a small smile. I hugged her once more before leaving, repeating my promise to return soon. On the way to the police station, my phone buzzed again and again. Howard. I ignored the first calls. On the fifth, I answered. I needed to buy time. "Hello," I said, my voice cold. "Margaret?" Howard's voice came through, sounding almost relieved. "Thank God. I've been calling you all morning. Lillian picked Sophie up last night and still hasn't brought her back. She's not answering. I'm worried." The pretense in every word burned my throat. Worried? The man who hurt his daughter-in-law inside his own house? "Sophie is safe," I said flat. "She's with Lillian." "Why didn't you tell me you were coming home early? And why aren't you home yet? Where are you?" "I'm taking care of a few things," I deflected. "We'll talk later." "What is going on? You're acting strange." "We'll talk in person," I said, and hung up before he could ask more. At the Chatham County Police Department, Detective Elena Brooks took my statement. She listened to everything. Watched the wall clock camera clips, her mouth set. "Mrs. Hayes, this is severe domestic abuse against a young woman," she said, firm. "We'll file the report now and seek an emergency protective order requiring Mr. Howard to stay away from Sophie." "What about temporary custody? Can I apply for that?" "You can file immediately while this is processed. With this evidence, the judge is very likely to grant it." I spent hours giving details, signing forms, transferring every video file into their system. Elena contacted Family and Children's Services to assign a case representative. Slow because of paperwork, fast because the legal machine had started to turn. Near evening, I left with an official report number and a receipt for the protective order filing. Elena assured me a court officer would serve the no-contact order, barring Howard from approaching or contacting Sophie in any way. Driving back to Lillian's, I got a call from an unfamiliar number, a court officer. "I just served Mr. Howard," he said. He did not take it well. He insists it's fabricated, that you're pulling the child from the family." "I expected that," I exhaled. "Do you have a safe place for her? He no longer has the right to share a residence with her." "Yes, we're in the Garden District for now. I'll arrange a separate place in the next few days." "Good. If anything happens, call the police directly." At Lillian's, I found Sophie calmer, watching TV with Chloe. She jumped up the moment she saw me and threw her arms around me. "You came back," she whispered, like a door had opened. "I promised," I said, holding her steady. "I keep my word." Lillian tipped her head toward the kitchen and shut the door behind us. "Howard came by," she said quietly. A chill ran down my back. "When?" "About an hour ago. He was furious, shouting that you made this up to steal the girl. He said he'd just been served and he knew she was here. He demanded to see her." "Demanded?" "I blocked him, told him he was agitated and should leave. He threatened to call the police. I reminded him the order is against him. He left, but I think he'll be back." "I think we should move," I said, rubbing a hand through my hair. "I won't drag you and Chloe into this." "Don't be foolish, Margaret," Lillian said, a hand on my shoulder. "Stay as long as you need. We have rooms. Sophie is finally starting to feel safe." I hate imposing. He was family, once. All the more reason to face it. What he did is unforgivable. Sophie comes first. She's still just a girl. I nodded. "One more favor. Stay with her tonight. I'll finish the temporary custody filing, change the locks, and secure a place of our own. From now on, every contact from Howard goes through the police and Assistant District Attorney Harold Nguyen. No private meetings." "Understood," Lillian said, pouring more tea. "I'll call a locksmith now. You handle the paperwork." I went back to the living room. Sophie looked up, eyes still puffy, but calmer now. "Sweetheart," I said, kneeling to her level. "Tonight we stay here. Tomorrow, I'm taking you to a counselor at Savannah Wellness. Then we'll finish the paperwork with Detective Brooks. From now on, no one touches you." Sophie squeezed my hand and nodded very slowly. Out on the porch, river wind moved through the jasmine. The scent was light, like a promise that morning would come. My phone buzzed. Howard again. I let the screen glow, then let it go dark. The locks were set. The order was served. The truth had crossed the threshold. The rest, let the law keep its rhythm. I was grateful for Daniel, my son who had stood between two shores, because he finally chose the right one, the side of truth, the side of Sophie's safety. That night, as I settled Sophie to sleep on Lillian's living room sofa, the girl, grown but thinned by fear, looked at me. "Mom, he won't hurt me anymore, will he?" "No, not ever again," I said, holding her hand. "I will protect you, always." "What if he gets angry because you know?" "That doesn't matter anymore. What matters is you are safe now." She whispered, "I prayed every night for someone to see. I was afraid to say it." "It isn't your fault," I said slowly. "You are not wrong. The wrong is a grown man using violence and calling it discipline." Sophie gave me the smallest smile, the first I'd seen in weeks, then drifted off, her hand still holding mine. I sat there, watching the peacefulness on her face for the first time in many sleepless nights, and I swore we would rebuild this life the way she deserves. The next morning, the attorney called. The judge had signed an expanded protective order. Howard was barred from approaching or contacting her in any form, pending charges from the Chatham County District Attorney's Office. Daniel texted. He would cooperate, surrender the keys, and step away from 7 Venetian Lane so the process could move cleanly. A weight lifted, only a beginning, but the right one. When I hung up, Sophie stood in the kitchen doorway, hope and caution in her eyes. "Are we going to be okay?" I opened my arms and held her. "We are, I promise." The weeks that followed were for adjustment and healing. We rented a small apartment in the Garden District, close to Lillian, a refuge with morning light and windows facing jasmine. I postponed everything else and spent my days installing new locks, a doorbell camera, and keeping appointments with police and prosecutors. Sophie began therapy at Savannah Wellness Clinic, 3 sessions a week. Dr. Ramirez, an adult trauma specialist, said after a hard first hour, "There's progress, but the wound is deep. She's lived too long with night watchfulness and quiet threats." "Will she get through it?" I asked. "Yes, when a stable adult protects her and therapy holds steady. The fact you acted quickly, preserved evidence, and obtained the protective order, that's life-saving." I bowed my head. I should have seen sooner. "Abusers hide well," the doctor said. "They borrow words like instruction, order, or family reputation to confuse the victim's sense of right and wrong." I nodded. "I'll be here, every day. As for supervised contact, legally, only consider it when Sophie is more stable. I'll prepare a clinical report for the court and recommend postponing any non-essential interaction." "Thank you, doctor," I exhaled. At night, Sophie still startled awake. "The nightmares will thin out," the doctor said. "We'll teach her to reclaim the light, the room, and her voice." In the afternoons, we'd stop for ice cream on the next street, our small ritual after therapy. On the way, river wind moved through the lines of live oaks and their moss. I thought about the road ahead, filings, hearings, new locks, the women who watched the light group I'd bring Sophie to. But in that moment, under Savannah's soft gold, I knew. The truth now stood at our door, and this time, it would not leave. "How was Dr. Ramirez today?" I asked, as Sophie sat on the porch steps, a cup of vanilla ice cream softening in the late sun. "Good," she said softly, more open than usual. "He taught me to breathe in counts when the fear rises." "Does it help?" "It does, when the fear isn't too big, or isn't—" "And when it hits hardest?" She looked toward the jasmine, moving lightly. "I think of you. I think now you'll protect me." That simple line stung my eyes. I slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Always." That night, after Sophie fell asleep, Daniel knocked. His face was tight. I poured coffee. "Mom, Howard's gathering character witnesses," Daniel said flatly. "He says he'll prove you made this up to ruin his good name and divide the family. Neighbors, old co-workers, even a few people from church. He says they'll swear he's a perfect gentleman." "I have the video, Daniel," I said, steady, "and the protective order." "I know. I just want you ready. His attorney will hammer that you were silent too long and lean on his Southern reputation." "Good." I set the cup down. Truth doesn't fear the light. In the days that followed, on Lillian's and the attorney's advice, I documented everything. Sophie's therapy schedule, our sessions at the Savannah Wellness Clinic, invoices, receipts, photos of the new locks and the doorbell camera, and every report with Detective Elena Brooks. On weekends, we walked the riverfront, stopped at the used bookstore on Jones Street. Nights brought fewer nightmares, but sometimes fear still came like a sudden cold wind. One evening, while I sorted papers at the table, Sophie asked quietly, "Is this all my fault? If I'd been stronger, maybe it would be different." I set the pen down and turned fully to her. "No, it is never your fault. What he did came from the dark in him, not from your worth." "Did he ever see me as family?" "I don't know," I said truthfully. "Some people learn to heal. Some choose denial. What matters most is you're safe now, and we're going to keep it that way." 2 weeks later, the court ruled. Howard's motion to dissolve the protective order was denied. Dr. Ramirez's clinical report, together with the video evidence and Sophie's protected statements, proved decisive. The judge suspended all contact and required a psychological evaluation and treatment before any future interaction could even be considered. I knew this wasn't the end. Howard would not let go easily, but it was a turning point. That night, as Savannah rested under warm streetlights, I sat on the Garden District balcony. Inside, Sophie slept, really slept, for the first time in weeks. I thought about the road behind us, discovery, rescue, filings, therapy, the long calls with Harold Nguyen. The wind carried river scent, and the hush of live oak leaves brushing moss. Somewhere I heard myself whisper, "We are coming back." Slow, but true. Tomorrow will continue. One more session, one more cup of tea, one more page in the file. And the light, this time, stood at our porch and did not leave. And even though the road was long, for the first time in a very long time, I believed we would be okay. My phone buzzed. Lillian had sent a photo from the porch BBQ that afternoon. Sophie was smiling, a marshmallow skewer in her hand over the coals. Her eyes were bright, a true joy I hadn't seen in so long. Under the photo, Lillian had typed, "That smile is worth every battle, isn't it?" I wrote back, "One battle at a time." Today, 18 months after the night I hit a camera in the wall clock of Sophie's room, our life stands on a different path. We live in a small garden district house with a little plot for vegetables and a jasmine trellis on the porch. I took a local job coordinating warehouse logistics. No more long absences. I'm home every night. Sophie is 31 now. The nightmares that once came thick now come thin. Therapy is down to once a week at the Savannah Wellness Clinic. Dr. Ramirez says the progress is clear. The emotional scars will linger for a time, but Sophie has learned to face them, to know the past was not her fault, to read danger cues, to ask for help. On Jones Street, at a small workshop, she's assisting a weekend crafts class. She has new friends. She laughs more. I hear that laugh float through the doorway each afternoon, light, easy. As for Howard, the law took its course. After multiple hearings and evaluations, he was convicted for domestic abuse, sentenced to community service and mandated treatment, and the protective order was extended. He lost the right to live at 7 Venetian Lane, permanently. Any contact, if ever, would only be considered with written consent from Sophie and her treatment team. Sometimes his attorney sends letters about remorse and healing. On ADA Harold Nguyen's recommendation, the judge has kept the terms in place. No contact until professionals confirm safety. To this day, Sophie does not wish to meet. When it's mentioned, she goes quiet, looks into her palms, and changes the subject. Dr. Ramirez says that's healthy. Boundaries, stolen from her for too long, are now respected. Maybe one day, if she is ready, she'll choose some form of contact. The choice belongs to her. What haunts me most in this journey is the quiet of the harm. Howard kept the shell of a Southern gentleman. Neighbors, church, former co-workers, everyone believed. No one saw what happened when the door clicked shut. No one, except a frightened daughter-in-law without a voice. I learned to listen for signs. Sophie's changes were not a phase. They were calls for help I regrettably heard late. Now I pay attention, not only to Sophie, but to young people around me. A few times I've spotted troubling situations and called the authorities. Better to check and learn it's nothing than to pass by and leave someone to endure. Inside our home, we rebuilt trust. Sophie knows she can say anything. No judgment, no punishment. We keep rules and boundaries, but we talk them through with respect and love. Discipline, when needed, is conversation, natural consequences, and example, never violence. What makes me proud is watching Sophie become someone who protects. At the workshop, she stands up for a classmate who's being bullied. "Everyone deserves to feel safe," she told me, calm and sure. Recently, Detective Elena Brooks asked me to share at a parents and guardians support group. I told our story, emphasizing belief, preserving evidence, acting fast, and letting the law do its part. Afterward, a woman hugged me, in tears. She had just discovered harm during visitation. "I installed a camera because I saw the signs, like you," she said. "Your story gave me the courage to continue." I carry that with me every day. Hope. Hope that Sophie keeps healing and growing strong, despite what she faced too soon. Hope that this story makes someone pause, listen, and step into the light. Hope that we, as a community, guard our children better. The little camera in the wall clock did more than record terror. It saved Sophie. It gave me the truth inside my own house and the tool to protect her. A desperate act became a deliverance. This afternoon, I see Sophie laughing in the yard, washing soil from her hands after trimming the beds, teasing the mixed-breed dog we adopted last year. The eyes that once held so much fear are clear now. The old shadows have given way to life. Silence has softened into laughter, small stories about class, friends, dreams. On the porch, jasmine moves in the breeze. Evening light pours gold. I close the door and leave the light inside. Sometimes, when we're watching TV or reading before bed, my boy curls into my arm. The way he rests his head reminds me how far we've come. In those moments, I'm grateful. Grateful that night I trusted my gut. That I didn't ignore the signs, that I faced the truth, even when it hurt to breathe. This road isn't easy. Some days feel hopeless. Some nights are doubt and guilt. I ask myself, are we making progress? Will we ever be fully past the trauma? Then the small answers come. A real smile, a night without nightmares, an unexpected hug. All of it telling me we're headed the right way. To the parents watching, trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Kids change for many reasons, but sudden changes with fear, withdrawal, or physical signs like dark circles or bruises, those must never be ignored. Talk to your child. Be present. Watch and listen to what isn't spoken, the way they play, the way they draw, the way they avoid your eyes. And remember, violence against a child is not discipline. It is not education. It is not for their own good. It is abuse. Plain and simple. As a community, we owe protection to the most vulnerable. We owe our voices to those who can't speak yet. Our story has a good turn. Against the odds, Ethan is safe. He is healing. He is growing up in love and respect. Not every story ends that way. Some children endure for years because no one steps in, no one notices, no one believes. Don't let that happen. Stay alert. Be the voice. Be the protection every child deserves. If this story touched you, please like the video. Give this dad a little sunlight. Subscribe to Trucker Dad Journal so you won't miss the next story I tell with my whole heart. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. If you've ever had to make a hard call to protect a child, share your experience. Knowing where you are and when you're listening warms me, and it might help another family. Did you enjoy the story? And where are you listening from? I'll see you in the comments. If you'd like to support the channel, a super thanks helps me keep bringing stories like this. Thank you for your kindness. I look forward to reading your comments. On screen are 2 new stories I recommend. There are many more on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next one. With love and respect.